Thank you very much. So I'm Tony Lembke. I'm a GP in Austenville in northern New South Wales, which is Bundjalung country. And I guess we border with the Yugambeh people and we acknowledge their custodianship of this land. So if I was in Austenville today, and I will be going back there, it's Austenville Show Day today. So you're missing the Austenville Show. It's only an hour and a half down the road. So there's Bob Wilson and Chook Fowler getting ready for the show. And if you were in Austenville today, down the main street, you'd hear the dulcet tones of Peter Crawford, who's been the ground announcer at the Austenville Showground for the last 30 years. And his voice booms over the whole town. And we, at the same time as the Austenville Show, we normally hold the Austenville Gopher Fest, which is our competition for the Indy 500 up here. Austenville is a retirement communities. We're going to be talking about data today. We'll have a chat about data between us. And as we've discussed, if you go to menti.com and put that code in, then we'll be sharing our ideas about the use of data in general practice. And I think we can often talk about data in a very theoretical way and what may happen with big data sometime in the future and what the government or the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare may do with data. We're going to focus on some ideas in this workshop I hope that you think will be practical to improve your care for your patients using data from now. So before we start, it's always good in a quality improvement process to define your aims, and I'm interested in what you think is the aim of general practice, which is something we don't think about that much, but we should. So what are we trying to achieve by running a general practice? So this is a chance for you to pop into the, I think it should have changed on your little Menti thing there. Is that right, Catherine? Can just a couple of thoughts, and we'll do this very quickly. What do you think the aim of a general practice is? And then in about 30 seconds, I'll tell you what my thinking around that is. I would have thought there we go. Quality care to patients is one of our thoughts. To help people be as healthy as they can be. I like that too. So, we'll get the hang of this switching back and forth in a minute. What I think, there's two aims for a general practice if you're the practice owner. One is
to provide richer and more meaningful lives for the people in our community, and to provide more meaningful and richer lives for those who choose to work in our service.
I think we want to provide richer and more meaningful lives to the patients who choose to come to see us and to the members of our community. And so sometimes that will mean that they're in good health. Sometimes we're just doing what we can for people in bad health. But whatever we can do to make their lives more richer and meaningful physically and mentally, and also being leaders in the community in rural towns socially and helping our community get some resilience. And also we as GPs are the leaders of our practices. We employ people in our practices and we want to provide a rich and meaningful environment for the people who work in our practice. If we're totally community focused and patient focused, we can create a miserable place for people to work. We need to have those two aims in mind to my way of thinking. And then when we think about data then, we can break down any quality improvement program into three aspects of the benefit. So the aim is to make richer and more meaningful lives for the people and to have a meaningful and rich working environment. When we're looking at the benefits of any program, I think we want to look at the benefits from a health point of view, the benefits from the experience of the people who visit us and the experience who work in our practice, and we want to look at the benefits from the patient bottom line. So we can spend a fortune on providing better care and go broke as a small business. We can provide an excellent environment for the clinicians who work for us, but a terrible environment for patients who come to see us, and we know that there are places like that. So when we think about the benefits of any of these ideas that we're going to raise, I like those categories. How does it improve the health of our patients? How does it make a better experience for our patients and for our clinicians? And what does it do for our practice bottom lines? Now, we're a traditional dairy area. much less dairy nowadays, but this is how I like to think about data. I'll just talk to this rather than listen to. So we think of data in three ways. One is, I was speaking to my neighbour, Mike Fitzgerald, and there he is there. He's a local vet, and he works for a number of the dairies. And the vet attached to a dairy practices herd health. They look at each individual cow in the dairy and measure a number of their production and their cycles and the food that they eat, or the inputs into that cow, the outputs from the cow, at enormous detail, and they understand the individual members of the herd using data very precisely. And they use that data to look at the herd health of the herd as a whole. So sometimes they will notice that in this particular herd there's a delay in their reproductive cycle that reflects the fact that there may be some trace elements missing in their paddock or in their feed, and they will modify the feed provided the cows to improve that. And then there's Norco, which is a local cooperative of all the dairy farmers that come together. They pool the data from all the dairies and use that to improve the output of the region as a whole, to promote good herd health, and to share best practice between one dairy and another. So I like to look at those three levels of when we're looking at data. How do we use data to improve the health of our individual patients? How do we use data to improve the health of the flock for which we're responsible, be it in casino, with the people in the community we look after, and also for the people community we look after? And how can I work with my neighbouring general practices to improve the health of our entire region? So data can be used at all those three levels, and that's the framework that I'm proposing that we use. Now, these little videos have been taken from a learning module that we've developed in ACRM about My Health Record and eHealth and using data, and so that's where they've come from. So the first thing, if we're doing herd health and looking at individual cows, is to get accurate clinical information about our patients. This is Larry Weed. I'll just show you a little bit of a talk he gave. Larry Weed was a professor of medicine at Vermont for a number of years. He died in 2017, so a couple of years ago when he was 93. But he was a trailblazing thinker in the philosophy of medicine and medical records and accurate diagnoses. And this is a clip from, I'll show you this clip. This is from a lecture he gave at Grand Rounds. In fact, he gave at a hospital in Atlanta in 1971, where he's looking at a patient's medical records in the hospital, which was divided into the nurses bit and the doctor's bit and the results bit, and trying to work out what was going on with that patient in the hospital. As it is now, was almost impossible. So this is 1971, and you can see if you think there's been much improvement. But this is a little clip from Larry Weed.
Now, when people source-orient data, you appear very unscientific. But it's even worse than the appearance. It's the very essence of the practice of medicine. This is not an idle discussion of little technical bookkeeping details. The practice of medicine is the way you handle data and think with it. And the way you handle it determines the way you think. Once you get over a period of time with multiple variables, the very structure of the data determines the quality of the output. And this is what's so hard for medicine to accept. They can't say things like, I know lots of good doctors who don't keep good records. They can't be separated that way.
They can't be separated. So the way you structure your data and your medical record determines the way that you think. And is a measure, therefore, if you're going to deliver quality practice, the structure of the data in your medical records need to be excellent. So I'm just going to, we've got a little exercise here. So we'll go back to this one, and I'll open this up on your phone. So there's a question that's going to be on your phone now. If you're developing, so Professor Weed is the instigator of SOAP, the Subjective Objective Assessment Plan Medical Records Keeping that we still use and taught, but he was very big on having an accurate problem list. If you don't know with enormous accuracy who your patients are and what they've got and what their current problems are, then you can't structure your thinking correctly and you can't make good decisions when you need to about that patient. So this is a a fairly typical medical record that we might see. It might be sent to you by another practice. It may reflect some of the records in your practice. What I'd like you to do is pick out what you think are the key problems for this patient in the problem list. What are the headings that should go in this patient's problem list? And then there'll be a number of them. You can add a number of options in the Menti app. So let's we'll just spend a couple of minutes having a look at that, and then I'd like you to enter what do you think are the current problems for this patient.
Picking them or interpreting them?
Interpreting them. So interpreting them. So what are the problems that you would like in your practice, current problems is for this patient, what would you like it to say? Or if you were transcribing this, if you were entering this patient into your practice, what would you say their current problems are? And some of it's a bit of a guess, I appreciate that. So it's not really an exam, so we'll come back and we'll have a look at some of the things that you have put. Submit, yeah. Excellent. I like what you've put. So there's some of your answers. We'll go back. So this happens all the time. Is this an experience you have often, that trying to work out, there's a list of stuff, and trying to work out, if you wanted to have a register in your patients of all the patients who have osteoarthritis, or all the patients who have depression, or all the patients who have diabetes, then you want accurate problems list to reflect that. You can't be proactive and systematic in managing your patients if you don't know who they are and what they've got. So when we look at this, and you've said these answers, so well done. So he has, the first one, we might say he has ischemic heart disease or cardiovascular disease, doesn't he? So that's a heading that I like to have in my records. And in your practice, you should have some agreement about the sort of headings that you like. But if someone's had an infarct or an angioplasty or bypass graft in their past history, I want to see the diagnosis of ischemic heart disease in their current problem list, because it reflects the way that you manage secondary prevention, doesn't it? So that's important. He's had a TIA, so then you would add cerebrovascular disease to the list. So the past history would include a TIA and whatever's there, but you want to have in the current problem list, cerebrovascular disease is something that needs to be managed proactively and systematically. A number of you put osteoarthritis. I think that's very clearly, or almost certainly, this patient does have osteoarthritis, and that's often missed out in current problem lists, but it's an important one to have. It looks like this patient has diabetes. Many of you got that because of his medication list. So he's got probably type 2 diabetes. He's not on insulin, so you could probably be a bit more specific about that. The patient, some of you picked up, the patient has probably chronic kidney disease. Could be acute kidney injury, but probably chronic kidney disease. Just look, and then he's got chronic pain for some reason that's and that would happen often. That there'd be, why is this patient on Zoloft? There's nothing in the current problem list. He's got depression or anxiety, possibly depression. It's not in the current problem list. Would any of you see situations where you get a record, there are medications that aren't explained by the current problems. That would happen all the time. So if we're going to have accurate clinical records, I think that what we need to focus on when we see patients, particularly for chronic disease item numbers or for annual checks, is making sure that current problem list actually reflects that patient's current problems. And that includes moving things that aren't still a problem into the past history list once they're fixed. Just while we're on this patient, would any comments about the medication list?
Metformin's a bit iffy. EGFR.
Yep. Would anyone have any records where there's old medications there from years ago that are still showing as all the time?
It drives you nuts.
Yeah. It's universal, isn't it? But it shouldn't be. The information that goes out of our practice should be timely and up to date, particularly in this age of My Health Record and sharing data. We don't know why he's on the Tarjan. Maybe the osteoarthritis. Maybe he's got a crooked back. Is that an appropriate medication? He's on Nexium. We don't know why. What about the Lipitor? No dose. And it was last printed 2018, and his cholesterol's 7.2. So maybe this patient is chosen not to take the Lipitor, and it's not really current medication. That's something that would want to be addressed. What about he's got a diagnosis? Now we know he has a diagnosis of both ischemic heart disease. What else should he be on?
It shouldn't be on the Mobic.
No. He shouldn't be on the Mobic because he's got an EGFR of 32 and he's got ischemic heart disease. There's no aspirin. So he should be on an antiplatelet agent. Antiplatelet agents decrease the risk of another event by a third. We know this patient has ischemic heart disease and he's not on it. Any practice you go to, a lot of patients with a history of ischemic heart disease who aren't on antiplatelet agents. Statins also decrease your risk of another event by a third. This person's not taking his statin. So just once we look at this patient record individually in our herd health analogy, once we analyse this cow with some detail, there's quite a lot you can learn from the medical record, and there's plenty of scope for us, I think, in my practice, and perhaps in yours, to improve the quality of the information we hold about our patients. So that was the point of that one. Now, just going to do a little bit about shared informed decision making, which follows on from that. This is Fred Flintstone. I'd like you to calculate Fred's absolute cardiovascular risk. To have a guess, first of all. 5-year risk, according to Australian guidelines. There's a spot in there. I'll open up the thing so we can have a guess. There it is. Is that on which app is that on? Good having 15 apps. So have a guess what you think. I don't know, I'm going to show both at once, but we'll work it out. Safari's vanished. And then you can go to cvdcheck.org.au. It's the Australian standard for calculating. So pop onto cvdcheck.org.au on your phone and see whether you're right about the there you can put your guess in now. That's the percentage, 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, 25, 30 or 35. And then go to CVD check if you'd be so kind, and you can put in your yeah. Good point. There he is. Right, while you enter the, I wanted to show, so this is the Australian one that you've just done for our mate here. We can calculate that. So I've got a 5-year risk of heart attack and stroke about 17%, which is considered high risk. We have to work out what to do with that information. I like this CVD risk calculator, which is at that address you can see there. The absolute CVD risk benefit calculator. I'll show you why I like this one. This is using the 10-year Framingham data, but this is our patient is 65, wasn't he?
What's that website? Web address?
chd.bestscienceMedicine.com/calc2.html. But you can do a search for CHD risk calculator best science medicine. What's his blood pressure? 156. His cholesterol was 6.2 and his HDL was 1.2. So there's our Fred Flintstone. And this is a tool used to explain what cardiovascular risk means for your patients who are making the decisions. So a 10-year risk for Fred here is a 70% chance nothing will happen. So the 70 smiley faces. 30% chance that in the next 10 years he'll have a heart attack or stroke. I did. The Australian standard is 5-year risk, and this tool is a 10-year risk. So the 17% was a 5-year risk, the 30% is the 10-year risk. And I'll talk a little bit more about those calculators. So you can say to Fred, using this tool, look, if we put you on a statin, you can see in the middle there I'm pressing on the low to medium intensity statin. If you take a statin, then the chance of having nothing happen goes from 23%, with 7% of you will benefit, so 8 of you will benefit from taking a statin out of 100. So that means that still 23 of you will have a heart attack, but there'll be now 77% who won't. So that's the benefit of the statin. We know it decreases your risk of having a heart attack by a third. He's fairly high risk, and therefore there is a significant benefit from taking a statin. You can say to him, mate, if you take up physical activity, the benefit's about the same. If you eat a healthy diet, the benefit's even a little bit better than that. And these are the things that you can do. If you take ezetrol, it makes no difference at all. If you go on a sulfonylurea, it makes no difference at all. If we put you on medications for your blood pressure, huge benefit in risk for this patient. So you can run through with this tool, explain to your patients that I'm going to suggest we go on a statin and a blood pressure tablet, up to you, but these are the potential benefits. About a 9% chance that you'll benefit, which means that 91 of you will take it for no reason at all, and 9 out of 100 would benefit from taking it. The benefits aren't as high as we think, in other words, but we can explain it to our patients and let them decide. The other thing, it tells you the number needed to treat. So the number needed to treat for a statin in this patient is 13, which is about right, because the risk was about 30%. The absolute risk reduction was about 10%, a third of that by the statin, which a little bit less than 10, and the number needed to treat is 100 over the absolute risk reduction. There you go. So absolute risk reduction was about 10%, so it's about 10. So that means about 13 of you would have to take a statin for 1 of you to benefit, and 12 of you would take it for nothing or for harms. So that's a tool that we can use for shared decision making with our patient, and there are a number of tools like that. Well, that's that address there. I might it's hard to read, isn't it? But if you do a Google search for best science medicine risk calculator, it'll come up number 1. There it is there. And that's a podcast I listen to. They're great, those best science medicine people. This we use the Framingham data, which is based on 11,000 patients in Framingham, which is in Massachusetts, in the 1960s and 1970s. 10,000 patients. That's what we've been basing our cardiovascular risk calculators on ever since. So in New Zealand, the team led there by Rod Jackson and Sue Wells. Have you heard about their program? Since 2004, they've run a program in Auckland where data is automatically extracted from a general practice software every evening and sent to their database, getting the actual real-time numbers, the relevant factors that you might think are important, their ethnicity, their blood pressure, their cholesterol, whether they smoke, what medications they're on, all of that information every night taken from the general practices and stored, and that's matched against the hospital data about who has a heart attack. So if they say, using that regression analysis, that this is a risk, that's because it's real-time monitored and it changes over time. So the Framingham data, which is based on 11,000 people in 1960, 1970 in America, the New Zealanders now have 400,000 people, been doing it since 2004, and they've done a regression analysis and all the factors that are needed for that. So why we continue to use the Framingham data and not use the Auckland data is beyond me, but the calculator and the algorithm that's chosen is very political. And there is an alliance of the Kidney Foundation, Heart Foundation, and the and other people who choose these things. So if you use the predict data, which is available, see there in this calculator, the risk, the actual risk for this person is much less. This is a 5-year risk now. We said it was 17% using Framingham data. The actual risk turned out to be much less, as it happens, and therefore the benefits of treatment are correspondingly less. Nonetheless, we're currently using cvdcheck.org.au, which is the Australian standard for cardiovascular risk. But it's worth knowing that these other teams have done a lot of work. And so data's data, but the information you get from that and the knowledge you use to help your patients is different. But that's a little bit about using data on individual patients in our practice. So you guessed and you've calculated the absolute cardiac risk. This is a formula. I had to look it up. I was writing a program to automatically calculate cardiac risk. So we do an annual check on patients, and it prints out their preventative health status and their risk and the number needed to treat for statins and stuff. So that's the formula I got from the National Prescribing Society. So Catherine, would you like to explain that to us? But it's complicated regression analysis to work out that number, 17%, is based on the age, sex, cholesterol, HDL, blood pressure, whether they smoke or not, whether they've got diabetes, whether they've got left ventricular high virtue, and I don't know what the T is, can't remember. So that's the formula. And the numbers we talked about. So just you focusing in health. So we've talked about individual patient data and how you can use that to improve the care in your practice by identifying patients at high risk and using shared decision making with your practice. If we look at our practice population as a whole, once we've coded the current problem list accurately, we can get a registrar of all our diabetic patients. So this is a partial registrar of the diabetic patients. There are 354 diabetic patients in our practice, and this is a spreadsheet that's pulled out of the software of what their cholesterol is, what their HbA1c is, when they were last seen, what their age is, all of that stuff. And we can use that to see who's missing out on care. So we know the people who are coming in frequently because we see them, but there are people who aren't coming in that would benefit from a focus, and we can use these sort of numbers to find the people that we should call to come into our practice.
You use PenCat to extract.
So you can use, so this is built into Genie, which is the software we use. There are similar registers, I think, built into best practice and medical objects, but PenCat can also do this, as can Polar, which we'll mention later. But there are plenty of tools if you're really going to be. You get good bang for your buck in your practice by proactive chronic disease management, by preventing illness. And we can do that better if we use the data, and we can use that today to see who we're not seeing and what we can do and to get a feel for our practice. So the other thing that we found useful in our practice is identifying high-risk patients. So I think we've got another little quiz on that one. I'll talk about our... So we run in our area a winter strategy, which means that with the support of the Pair Chen and the local health district, general practices are encouraged to identify those patients who they consider to be at high risk of ending up in hospital during winter, and to manage them with support of practice nurses funded by the PHN and support a local health district chronic disease crew to keep those people well and out of hospital. You should know that it's cheaper for a patient, for the system, if a patient sees their GP every week for a whole year, every week, than it is for them to spend one day in hospital. So an investment by the local health district in keeping into general practice to keep people out of hospital is a no-brainer, and it's weird that it almost never happens. But as a system approach, it would be very wise. So we've adopted that in our area for the last 3 years. We've got a winner strategy. So this question's asking, in your practice, there's 2 strategies you can use to do this. There's a HARP tool, a hospital avoidance tool, that's been used in the Medical Homes Project, and a number of tools. Polar has a tool. Polar's like PenCat. They can analyse your data and tell you which patients are at high risk of hospital admission. The tool we chose to use was the eyeball tool, for the GPs to say, we know these are the people who are likely, knowing our tribe, knowing our flock, knowing our herd, these are the ones we want to put extra care into. And this question asks, what conditions would you think would make you, help you identify patients who need extra care? But we won't spend too much time on that, because I'm sure you even know immediately in your mind those patients that are at high risk of going into hospital because they were in hospital last winter and they're likely to be in hospital this winter. So there are a number of conditions that make us. And so this is again practicing a bit of herd health and knowing your flock well and being proactive in how you manage them. So this is we've got a register of our patients who are enrolled in the winter strategy, and we keep track of when they were last seen, when their next appointment is, whether they've been to rehab, whether they have sick day action plans that they understand, which proved to be one of the most important parameters of identifying people out of hospital. When they were last phoned in the winter strategy, the practice nurse phones them every week or texts them, which is a new technology we're testing out to see how they're going, and she often finds people who are struggling at home who benefit from being brought in. And she reminds them about their 6-day action plans and keeps track of when they're in hospital and that sort of stuff. So that's using data to be proactive in managing our herd. And there's been the analysis by the George Institute on the local program for that has shown to be very positive. It's very hard to prove benefits. It's hard to prove you keep people out of hospital, but we're working on evaluating and using the data to show that that's something that would happen.
So how does the Pair Chen get involved?
So the Pair Chen has a staff member who coordinates it, a practice nurse set up a network to support the practice nurses and pays a practice nurse an hourly rate for all the patients to match the number of patients that the practice is enrolled. So we can use our chronic disease nurse for an extra day to ring and do all this work. They also, with funding from the local health district, if someone needs a pulse oximeter or they need to see an exercise physiologist or they need a physio to call in at home to do some chest physio, we can fund that through that program. And then the hospital has a chronic care disease team that we've never met before. They must be doing something, but now they come and see patients on the winter strategy. And if a winter strategy patient attends hospital, we get an automatic notification and the chronic disease team in the hospital, so they can go and visit them in hospital and start planning for the discharge. So it's quite comprehensive. It just makes sense, really. Because normally winter strategy planning for the hospital is bugger, it's going to be busy this year, we'll close elective surgery. That's a normal planning. So they thought that might be able to do a bit better than that. Case finding in general practice is part of having a patient safety approach. So we're going to, this is another little exercise. I'm interested to do case finding in all the software. There is a search capacity. You can either do it in PenCat or in the native software, and there's a number of if statements that you use, and you code it like, what are the criteria you're looking for, and it'll tell you the patient. So we're going to do some pseudo coding now to find patients at particularly risk of kidney damage. So what would you type in? So the first line is if patient is active, that is, they're not dead and they're still visiting your hospital, and patient's, say, age is greater than something, and what else might you put in? You can do the age one. What else might you put? What other lines might you put in if you're doing a search for patients at particularly risk?
Diabetic.
You can type it into the thing, but if patient diagnosis contains diabetes, that's a pseudo-coding approach. If patient diagnosis includes hypertension, any others, you can just throw them out there. You don't have to type them in.
No, I can bring on to that.
If patient EGFR is less than 60, 50, whatever you're searching for. Any medications put them at risk? If patient medication includes NSAIDs, if patient medication includes diuretic, if patient, so you could, with all the software we can design tools to find the patients at risk. And taking a flock approach, a herd approach, and identifying those patients at risk. How many patients do we think have the triple whammy, are on a diuretic and an ACE inhibitor or an ARB and a non-steroidal in your practice? Do we know? It's easy to find out. So if we're taking a patient safety, and I'm sure we have them, it's easy enough to find out how many patients. When we're looking at current problem lists, the one that I find is left off the most is chronic kidney disease. It's often not included in a current problem list, even though they've seen the nephrologist a number of times. So that's worth having there because you're going to be proactive or systematic. You want to know your patients with chronic disease because it changes medications that you might use. So there's a case finding approach would be another way of using data in general practice. And okay, you can let me know whether you think that that's done really well or that we don't do it enough. Just going to talk a little bit about then something about patient experience and access. So using data to improve your patient's access, that means your appointment, the way you handle appointments, the way you handle patients being able to see you in your practice. This is a long time ago, maybe 2005, I went to a IHI conference in San Diego, which was cool. And then I learnt there that there was a big focus on decreasing delay. If patients can't get in to see you or there's delay in seeing you, they're undifferentiated, you don't know what's happening to them. Using delay as a rationing procedure is dangerous for your patients and it decreases satisfaction. It's the most common complaint patients make, but it makes it harder for the doctors. If patients want to see you, they can't. If it's a pressure cooker atmosphere, if you're always having to squeeze people in, if your appointment systems aren't well managed, it also reduces the revenue of your practice because there's potential people to see that you're not seeing and it affects patient outcomes. So we monitored in our practice, this is over a year period, how many patients wanted an appointment on each day of the week over a year. So this is different from how many patients got an appointment, because that's just measuring our rostering. But this is how many patients rang wanting an appointment, either routine or chronic, on any day of the week. And the question on the Mentimeter was going to be, what do you notice about that? But I'll just throw that out to you.
Monday's the busiest day.
So Monday's the busiest day. What else about that?
It's a seasonal change as well.
It's a little bit seasonal because August and September are higher, the green and blue ones in each month, but really it's remarkably consistent. One of the points about demand that they teach you in the IHI, Mark Murray is the expert on demand if you want to read his studies on the thing, that demand is finite and consistent and predictable. It's not unpredictable. And by looking at this data, we found that on Mondays in our practice, 108 people want to come in, but this is a long time ago, but there are 50 people every Monday who ring for an urgent appointment. There are 36 on Tuesday, 31 on Wednesday, 33 on Thursday, and 33 on Friday. And that's been consistent between 2005 and up until now. We count how many people ring for an appointment and keep track of it so we can make that many appointments available in the appointment book. So many practices on Monday blame the patients or the receptionist. Bloody Sue's booking everybody in. Why do the patients always ring on Monday? Don't they know it's going to be busy? And complain about Mondays every day for 20 years. So it's finite and predictable. We know we will. Anyone who rings up and says they need to be seen, we will see. We don't say no, we're full. But it's not, doesn't mean that it goes forever. We know there are going to be between 50 and 55 on a Monday. So we have 2 doctors on a Monday with no appointments to see all comers because we see about 25 a day. And then we track, and if it's seasonal, just recently we've had to increase the numbers on Mondays and Friday afternoons because there was an increase. If you track it and you find you're double booking a lot of people, then you start to release more, you reserve more appointments each day with green appointments in our appointment book. They're the acute ones that can't be booked. So on Monday it's 2 doctors, on Tuesday it's 1 doctor plus another for another person. And it's predictable, so we can keep track of it. And it's remarkable how consistent that's been since we did this in 2005.
And was your data collection of how many people ringing up, was that just a simple ticker box for the reception?
Well, we started off doing a ticker box,
Yeah.
and then in our software we can extract the day the appointments were made
Yeah.
rather than the day they were given. So someone ringing on a Monday for an appointment, if they don't get the appointment till Thursday, the assumption is that they wanted it on the Monday, and that gives you an estimate of demand. The acute ones is easy because they're the only people who ever get. There's never a free appointment normally unless it's an acute one. So we can just see how many were made on Monday, how many were made on Tuesday for acute appointments. And then Jeannie built it into the software to do this calculation for us. So we also found that the number of appointments a patient wants every week is consistent, and that we had enough doctors to meet that number of appointments, and yet we had at that time a 4-week waiting list. So the problem then is backlog. The problem is that there has been a period of time where we're under-doctored or whatever it was. There's a backlog of 3 weeks. If we could clear that backlog, we had enough doctors to see the number of people who wanted to come. That's a consistent finding in every practice we've looked at, that the delays are caused by backlog rather than too many patients. And if you clear the backlog, you can handle the delay. We don't need, that's a subject for another talk, but I had to convince, this is slides I did to convince my partners back then that we had to do some work on this. This is why they're so old, because I haven't had to convince them since then. So I learnt that all waiting times are bad. It's possible to eliminate waiting. You need to deal with variation and backlog. So now this is, today, I did this morning. I don't know if you can see it, but we keep track of the third available appointment, which is the international standard for measuring delay. It's if someone rang up to see Catherine Amy, when's the third next appointment? Because the first one might be a fluke, it might be a cancellation for tomorrow, and the second one. The third one is considered the real, how long it takes to get an appointment. So you can see the third available appointment, the date's there for each of our doctors today. Don't tell them I showed you this. This is how many days the patients are waiting to get an appointment. So because I'm away at the moment and I've been there for a while, I'm rusted on, am I the longest? Jimmy's and I had 25 days wait. There's 82 people in the queue to see me. There's 341 booked into the future, but a lot of them are meant to be booked ahead because they're reviews and things. The queue is 64 until my third available appointment. 64? 82. But for most of the docs, that's about 50. So that means if they work 2 extra days, there'd be no queue. So I could go to Josh and say, look, if you want to work 2 extra days, you'll have no queue. People will be able to see you. They'll be able to ring up on Tuesday and see you on Wednesday. We need to manage it. It also lets us know, well, Annika hasn't been there long, so she does more of the green on calls because patients are less likely to ring and request her. I won't go to the nursing home. Someone else can go to the nursing home because we can monitor our demand that way and keep track of it. So that's using data to improve patient experience by improving their ability to get appointments. Using data for patient self-management is the next question, and I will open that. So a patient portal, does anyone have their software in their practice available for their patients to access? So this is Open Notes is a growing trend, but that's I had the page. So if we go to the Mentimeter, have a think, you can write them in or sing them out. Yeah. So we have a patient advisory group. I asked them what would they like if they could log into our system and see information. What would they like to see? And I'll actually show you some of the answers and you can rank them, I think. So here's some of the things that they wanted to do. Open up your Mentimeter. I think you can slide or change the order on this one. That's what it's meant to be. See if you can work out the order that my patients wanted. But the things there were, they want to check when they've got an appointment coming up. They want to view their results. They'd like to make an appointment. This was interesting. We asked them, if you have a symptom, how do you decide whether to go to the doctor or not? Because every time you have a symptom, you don't go to the doctor. What's your decision-making process? Who do you ask? Do you go to the chemist? Do you ask your family? Do you just wait? Do you have your own criteria in your head? Do you use Google to search? And all of those answers came up. But they found, So I'm thinking that if we had a system where to support patients in making that decision making on Monday morning or Tuesday morning, whether they need to go to the doctor or not, within our software that they could trust. So if we steered them towards reliable clinical information and advice, or even had algorithms. Larry Weed was into that, professor was into algorithms. He thought they were much better than humans at decision-making processes. But we had algorithms help your patients make decisions about whether they need to come to the doctor. That could be part of a patient portal, and we asked them about that. Would they like to see their health summary, their medication list, the actions they need to take as a result of their results? Would they like to order repeat scripts, and would they like to message their doctor? So there's some of the things that came out in our focus group with our patient advisory group. What do you think about any of those for your patients?
Our patients can use hot docs for appointments, so that's part of that, but that's not actually accessing our software. So you're talking about actually...
That's part of it, but they can make an appointment, and that's highly valued by patients. It's highly valued by us, isn't it, going to a restaurant? Or my son needed to see a doctor in Sydney, so I love being able to make an appointment and find out about the doctors online. I'm interested in patients getting their results because we spend a lot of trouble answering phone calls from patients. We've got a lot of systems to manage results, and it's wasteful. They didn't want their results when they don't want to see their results, like HbA1c was 14.2 and white cell count was 6.4, and because they didn't know. But when I said, what if there was an interpretation of the results? Your pap smear was normal and your iron levels are good, we'll see you in 6 months. They love that. So they said, we don't want to see our results. But when you offered, would you like an interpretation of your results? Even if it was, you better make an appointment. They love that. With my health record, the results will be going up in a week anyway. So that, not that any patient has ever been able to access my health record, but when they can, that'll be interesting. But they'll just be the numbers, which patients don't want.
Well, they worry about every asterisk.
Understandably. And we ignore every asterisk. So the truth must be somewhere in the middle. But so they want an interpretation of the results. I think that the medications are the most complicated thing to manage, and if they could access an updated medication list, perhaps they find that useful. It's amazing how any similarity between what I think they're taking, what the chemist is dispensing, what they're putting in their mouth is just a coincidence most of the time. And if I was the digital health agency, I would focus on a point of truth for medications. But so there's lots of things you could build into a patient portal, which is managing data on behalf, the patient's data on their behalf, but also improving their ability to manage their own health and improving their relationship with your practice and streamlining workflows in your making appointments, cancelling appointments, giving results, repeat scripts tend to be wasteful. The motto of the Canterbury Health System is don't waste people's time. They are consulted with the All Blacks and Air New Zealand, who are the only two organisations in New Zealand that have any widely to come up with something that would drive their health workers in a common ambition, and that's what came up with, don't waste people's time. So that has a lot of implications when you think about it. So we're nearly there. Using data for business analytics, the question I was going to ask, which you don't have to answer, was what KPIs would you use for your business? I'm not an expert on that. But certainly it is prudent to do better than we do and to track your billing and your monthly number of patients and how everybody's going. I don't think I need to talk too much about that. This is a tool by a colleague, Rivka Hagen, who runs a practice called businessmedicine.services, and she makes this available. It's a performance tracker where you put your numbers in on the spreadsheet and it converts it into different graphs so you can look at how you're tracking with your medicine. That mob is called Business. I'll look it up and tell you in a sec. The top bit, the orange bit, that's the system. So I wrote that practice analysis. The orange bit, is from our system at work. The things we can look up to do a practice analysis, and the bottom shot there is her tool, the practice performance tracker. If you search for practice performance tracker, it'll come up with that, and she offers that service to practices to help them manage their business well. I would be silly if I pretended to you I was good at managing my business. The final thing I think is most important is about measuring the impact of what we do. How can we be sure that the consultations that we're providing for our patients are having a positive impact in making their life richer and more meaningful? How do we know that we're achieving that? The advantage of knowing that is because we can do more of it if it's working and less if it's not. But as a profession, if we want to be able to demonstrate to the funders and to society the value of general practice, we're failing because it doesn't appear to be valued sometimes. But if we could demonstrate the difference we make to people's lives, we've got gold. Data is currency in that market, and we're very poor at producing it. But also, I want to know that what I'm doing is worthwhile for my patients. So here's Larry Weed talking about that.
That's fiction. It's not science. Better that you not write anything at all than something that's not absolutely reliable. All right, so a source-oriented record is essentially useless from the point of view of a rigorous audit. And mind you, if you can't audit a thing for quality, it means you do not have the means by which to produce quality. They're inextricably entwined also. If you can't evaluate what you're doing, then there's a very serious possibility that you do not know what you're doing, and that you've never defined your goal. And that's true in medicine. We have not.
So if you can't evaluate what you're doing, it's quite possible you don't know what you're doing, and you're not delivering quality if you can't demonstrate that you're delivering quality. So that lecture, he really gives it to the Atlanta hospital about their record keeping and what they should be doing. It's the only YouTube of Larry Weed, but it's good to watch. So I was in Tamworth recently. When you pool all this data, you can see whether you're delivering quality or not and what the needs of your population are. Hunter, New England, Tamworth in particular, has the highest cardiovascular mortality in Australia, and it's significantly higher than everywhere else, which meant that their Pair Chen decided to focus on a cardiovascular campaign in Tamworth, and they've organised it. I like it. They've called it 2,000 lives. They're trying to save 2,000 lives by better management of the risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So it's using data to focus your investments in a community. And so they've been giving their practices now, who've voluntarily enrolled in the program, their cardiovascular disease dashboard, where practices can see how they're tracking as far as identifying, first of all, and then managing their patients' cardiovascular risk factors. And so this is a individual practice handout. They also have a barometer that they use to measure the risk factor modification for their region. That's a use of data at that next level up, not for the individual. It sounds a bit disrespectful talking about people as cows, but excuse that. But for the individual person and then our flock as a whole, but then for the region as a whole, pooling that data to really make a difference. And it makes it easier for my practice if the Austinville community has a focus on healthy eating and exercise and walking and changing the environment of Austinville. So I should be down at the show taking out the Dagwood dogs today and putting in some macadamia nuts or something. And we've been doing this for a long time in our practices, monitoring with the collaborative program and other program, using run charts to monitor our quality improvement over time. So data and measurement are the oxygen of improvement. If you're going to improve, you need to be measuring what you're doing to make sure the changes you make are leading to improvement. We know that. Polar is another tool. It's Outlook Health. Does people have experience with Polar? So it's a bit like PenCat, but it's been developed by Chris Pearce, who's a friend of the ACRM and chairs the data committee, and his colleagues. It extracts data from general practices software in real time, collates that data to do regression analysis, and feeds back to the patients those practices a number of factors, including what we talked about, who's at risk of heart disease, which patients identifies at high risk of ending up in hospital. So you can close the patient's file and it will tell you based on our experience, this patient's at strong risk of being in hospital in the next month, and allow you to focus. So their Pair Chens who are enrolled with that can use that sort of data to look at hotspots of ill health, where the services are. There's often a mismatch between where the ill health is and where the services are, isn't it? So they can use that for that sort of planning. Once the general practices have accurate data, problem lists that reflect the actual problems of their patients, then you can use that to change the environment and the resources investment in an area. So it can be used by practices of individual patients, practice as a whole to analyse where their gaps are, and that collated data can be used to improve the health of the community. It's an excellent example of using data for more meaningful, richer lives for people, and to make it easier to deliver good care by making it easier for us to find those patients who need our care, deliver safer care in an easier way. It fulfills many of the criteria we set as an aim. So that's the polar, and you can look into, if you search for polar health, there's two tools, one for general practices and one for organisations like Pair Chen's. They're fairly new on the scene, but that you would recognise that as being like what CAT and PenCat do, similar but real-time analysis.
Following the 2010...
This is, I'm really interested in this, and I'll tell you why, but I'll show you this quick video. This is a thing called SmartVax.
Following the 2010 suspension of flu vaccines in kids, due to unanticipated adverse events, it became clear that an active monitoring system was needed. SmartVax is a software tool used to actively monitor adverse reactions following immunisation. The tool extracts data from GP practice software and sends a series of automated SMS texts to immunised patients, and monitoring the data received. So, how does it work? 3 days after an immunisation, patients or parents of children are sent an automated SMS text, inquiring if there was an adverse reaction to the immunisation. For example, pain, fever, or local reactions at the injection site. The patient can respond Y for yes or N for no. A yes response will trigger a second automated SMS, inquiring if medical attention was sought as a result of the reaction. The GP is also notified, so that if necessary, follow-up can be arranged, as well as keeping the practice records up to date. All patients who have had a reaction will be sent an SMS which contains a link to a smartphone survey. The survey further explores the nature, severity, and duration of the reaction. Surveys take less than 2 minutes to complete and allows us to collect detailed information about the reaction, how it was managed, and importantly, the outcome. Unidentifiable data is uploaded to a SmartVax secure server, where it is aggregated, analysed, and monitored for adverse event signals. Importantly, our patients, the public, deserve to be reassured with regards to the safety of immunisation, and, if there is a problem, that it is identified and dealt with appropriately and in a timely fashion. By working together with our patients, we believe that SmartVax can achieve this.
So that's pretty cool. It's working now. We don't have to do anything. It extracts information from our database automatically and sends it out to the patient. It doesn't rely on us remembering. And I'm really interested in one of my interests is, how can I be sure that what I've said to this patient with their back pain, or when changing their blood pressure tablet, or in my mental health consultations, talking to them about their struggles and how to better manage their thoughts and feelings, is it working? Is it making a difference? How can I measure the impact from that? And to ring people up 3 days later, everyone I see, is going to be impossible. But I wouldn't mind doing what SmartVax do, and I've been thinking about. So when I see someone, I can say to them at the time, look, do you mind if I send you a text in 3 days to see how you're going, to see how your back's going, and implement that at the time. So the text isn't sent, but in my software I write #SMS with the message I want to send, and then that's extracted automatically and sent, and the results are collated. So I don't have to do anything extra apart from that consultation, but I can start to actually see, of those patients with back pain, how many got better, how many ended up in hospital, how many of the mental health, how are you going, and recall people if they're not getting better. I think that has a lot of potential as a way of improving our ability to make our patients' health better in an easier way for me. And that's using that sort of SmartVax approach. And I think texting is good because patients all know how to text. Getting them to use a different app or having to open an app or carry an app with them is problematical. But if it was text-based, because it's quite easy now to get tools to send text automatically, to read the replies and to use a logic diagram and a flowchart how to respond to that and to record that. So I think that's the next thing we'll be using in our data, in our practice, to really be sure that we're having an impact on our patients. Is there anything you think that you'd like, what would you like to measure in your practice to see whether they're having an impact? Anyone got any thoughts?
It opens up a can of worms, doesn't it, to try and think of the responses coming in, I suppose, yeah. Makes you have to preempt.
You do, you'd start and then you'd learn, I think. You wouldn't anticipate. We've got a little chat I've set up on our website where people can chat, and I tried to make it anticipate what questions I'd ask, like can I book an appointment or how do I get results? Because it's all automated. It looks like someone's chatting back, but it's not really. It tells them it's a virtual thing. You would have seen those sorts of stuff. So someone yesterday put in, "Hi, it's Alyssa, I'm pregnant, what do I do now?" So I hadn't anticipated. It comes up and it says, "Oh, I don't know what you mean. I'm not really very smart like a real receptionist. Give us a ring on this." That's a default. But over time, there'll be less defaults and I'll know more of the sort of things that people say. And I think this chat thing would be similar, that you would learn with time what you'd start and you'd learn. Like any quality improvement program, the main thing is starting.
Any pain-related situation, obviously, that would be a useful tool, because time is obviously a thing that is going to make a difference. So you want to know if you're not achieving your aims, going down a spiral.
Pain would be a good one, wouldn't it? Is your pain better, worse, or the same?
Yeah.
Or on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your pain now? And you could track that. So in the winner strategy, we track patients, we send them texts, "How are you going? Do you need to see us?" And they can reply yes or no. So this is sort of an expansion of that.
It might help reduce, give the comfort that you don't have to just rely on medication. There's too much use of strong analgesics. Like it's in a pain scenario, whereas a bit of support can go a long way. Virtual support.
How's the earache now? Getting better, worse, or the same? So you didn't give the amoxil, but you want to check in 2 days. But to ring everybody that you've seen would be good, but difficult if you can sort of keep that connection going with your patients in an automated way. So when I see the earache, I can set that up to automatically happen in 2 days. I don't have to think about it again. That's the system I'd like, I think, to test.
It works well for the surgeons, doesn't it? You have patients who'll come back and they'll say, "Oh, and they rang me the next day to see how I was." I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
the practice nurse, and it just goes a long way, like you're saying, about care and support, and I think that's
That is good. So in America, Kaiser Permanente, it's all about the relationship with the doctor, because all our patients die. So everything we can, whether they stick with us, is about the relationship we form with them. And in Kaiser, if they're your patient, Catherine, the nurse, Dr. Amy asked me to ring to see how you were. Dr. Amy was interested in how your pain's going. That's all focused on that one relationship in the practice, and everyone supports that. So that's quite interesting. So that's all the things I want to talk about. Data. We've talked about data, getting accurate data on individual patients and good current problem lists, using that data to improve the decision supports for that patient and to give them personalised ability to decide whether to take medications or not, using that data to focus on those patients who need extra care, so we can be proactive and insist about that, identifying patients at risk of illness, and using data to look at our quality improvement programs and improve the health of our community, and then also to measure the impact of our day-to-day consultations. These are all things that are happening now in many practices. I want them to happen better in my practice. So my aim in this talk was for each of you to have one idea one idea of how you might use data to, in your practice, to make your patients' lives richer and more meaningful, and to make a more meaningful and richer life for the people who work in your practice. So I'd like you to think of what that one idea, at least one idea might be, and then I've achieved my aim, if you've all got one idea. So thank you very much.